Hope you guys having a blessed day. Everything is going well for you. God is blessing you and keeping you safe and protected, you and your families. Let me just get set up here. I just got in from the gym. Yeah, life is good, man. Life is good. No matter how bad things get, it can always be worse. Today, I want to talk about black on black violence and how a lot of it is not only on a ignorance of the individuals who perpetuate this sort of crime, but also how it's a manifestation of disconnected history, disjointed history, meaning that a lot of the systemic origins of discrimination against African Americans in this country, how they've been divorced from present day realities that African Americans face. I believe a lot of the dominant society does not like to place the Black experience within the context of the racial history in America. You will almost think that there's a sort of a disconnect between the dominant society and American history. They love to discuss the history that serves them, but any history that can make them or portray them as, the villain or, the bad, the bad person, you know, that tends to get erased. So I got all this oil in my hair, man, and got on my glasses. I might have to just put on the other ones. Yeah, so this isn't a cop out for black on black violence. You know, there is accountability that needs to be taken on the African American and not just African American, any Black Americans that come to this country by way of immigration. There needs to be an accountability there, in our community with Black on Black violence. It's not just a systemic alone issue, it's also an individual issue. All right. So, Black on Black violence did not appear in a vacuum. It is the product of centuries of historical choices, systemic exclusion, and deliberately engineered inequality that created conditions ripe for intracommunal harm. All right. If you really look at Black on Black violence, you know, the conditions that have been sort of put in place, the stage that was sort of set for the Black community in America, in a lot of ways is no different than the white on white crime that you had in historic, ancient Europe, prior to them coming to the Americas with the plague and a lot of the diseases that overtook some of the crops, the soil and the nature, and creating these really like massive food shortages. You had a lot of the Europeans at war with each other over a lot of the products, over the land, over the goods. There was a lot of white on white violence, right? A lot of the Europeans didn't really side with the Irish, right, for years, which led to a lot of even the Irish people being, becoming indentured servants in America. So there was a lot of white on white violence and a lot of division in the white community. All right, white, within terms of the series that we're discussing, and a lot of that violence, among a lot of the Europeans, essentially is what birthed the United States of America. All right. There were food shortages. A lot of people are sort of like victims of crime on their land. There was a lot of wars going on. So they're like, we got to get the hell up out of here. Right. We got to go find another land or another way out. Right. And so a lot of, the motivations, to come and explore, the new world was driven from, just really harsh circumstances, within the European community. And out of that, came sort of like even more. Of course, there were other reasons for them to go out and explore, new territory. But, a lot of it was just escaping the violence and the hunger, that was going on and just the devastation among the people. All right. So this sort of like violence within these different this intracommunal violence that occurs within the Black community is not just limited to the Black community. All right, there was a lot of intracommunal violence in the European community, all right, which led to partially to the discovery, and the development of the United States of America. All right, so Black on Black violence did not appear in a vacuum. It is the product of centuries of historical choices, systemic exclusion, and deliberately engineered inequality that created conditions ripe for intracommunal harm. All right. From the forced labor of slavery to Jim Crow laws, from discriminatory housing policies, all right, to modern segregation in schools and neighborhoods, each step in this chain of oppression laid the groundwork for cycles of poverty and scarcity. Anytime you put a group of human beings in conditions where there's no opportunity, all right, they're being, excluded, you know, there's going to be some sort of reaction. All right. It's no different in the European community with the plague, right? It's no different in the European community with the Europeans battling with the Irish and, battling amongst themselves over land and over resources. All right. Anytime the conditions are getting really dire, you're going to have some sort of conflict. All right. That's just not limited to Black folks. I just think Black people became sort of like the caricature or like almost like the poster child for these things because of just we're just so damn popular for whatever reason. So, unfortunately, what comes with that, is a lot of people put a lot of attention on you. They put a lot of labels on you. They put a lot of things on you. It's just how it's always been. So we tend to disconnect the African American experience from historical conditions. If the elites had it their way, they would remove all Black history and they'll just leave the present generation to just say, look at these niggas, look at them, right? And when you disconnect history from current present day realities, it kind of places the burden, right, of poverty. It kind of places the burden of inequality on the individuals. All right. There is a strategy behind divorcing African Americans from their history. That's why you have Donald Trump looking to erase all these different historical talking points from these museums because they don't want to give credence to the historic conditions that led African Americans to the state that they're in. All right. Black people didn't just, start off, right, in poverty. You had a lot of wealthy Africans, a lot of communities and civilizations that were built up that were very prosperous, all right, before they came to America. But when you're dealing with a dominant elite sort of like group, there's always an agenda, right, on the table. So if we can divorce these niggas from their history, people that come in present day, because people are simple minded, right? They're not going to go do the research. They're not going to go dig up in the history books and see what led up to the situation. For the most part, people are just blinded by what they see. All right. If they see you're fucked up, then you're fucked up, right? It don't matter about the history of maybe you grew up in a household of abuse, right? Maybe you were abandoned. Maybe you were in foster care, right? They don't give a damn. Most people just judge situations off of your current circumstances, right? The elites know this, right? So that's what they're kind of playing into. All right. My man, Bloodstained Believer, thank you for coming in. Shout out to you, man. They don't teach real Black history in schools. What they do is they show our children small things that don't look that bad to make it sound better for what they did. Talk to me. I love when you're in here, man, because you kind of just tell it like it is. So we're trying to reconnect the current present day Black experience to what are some of the conditions and the links in this chain that sort of like cushion some of this and a lot of times violence is just at its root really primal. It's like a very primitive sort of response, right? It's that emotional limbic brain part of the nervous system that really just reactive, not really thinking logically sort of part of the brain. So it says from the forced labor of slavery to Jim Crow laws, from discriminatory housing policies to modern segregation in schools and neighborhoods, each step in this chain of oppression laid the groundwork for cycles of poverty and scarcity. When you trace the thread from enslavement to mass incarceration, from redlining to disinvestment, you see that this violence is not about innate pathology. It is about people being placed in context where resources are scarce, right? Opportunities are denied and trauma goes unhealed, right? So if you're a victim of abuse, right, maybe somebody broke into your house, raped your children, raped your family, right, and you don't get any justice. They're like, hey man, just deal with the shit, move on, go to work, treat it like another day. You can't tell me that you're not going to have some sort of anger or just frustration and rage inside of you. Now I'm not, you may not be the person that go out there and burn shit down, but you're going to feel a certain type of way. All right. So when you're placed in these sort of conditions, right? And one thing I don't understand about mainstream society, like it's okay for everybody else to get angry, right? Charlie Kirk gets assassinated. It's okay for people to go into rage. It's okay for people to hang African Americans. It's okay for people to rage bait, say all kind of just toxic nastiness online. It's okay for everybody else to be angry and to rage. But when the Black people rage, and when they get angry, it's a problem, right? Oh, we can't have that, you know. So it says here, when you trace the thread from enslavement to mass incarceration, from redlining to disinvestment, you see that this violence is not about innate pathology. It is about people being placed in context where resources are scarce, opportunities are denied, and trauma goes unhealed. The story of Black violence is the story of structural deprivation turned inward, a mirror reflecting America's unkept promises. Another layer is the way history is often deliberately severed from present day realities, as though today's crime was born overnight. Power structures benefit when historical threads are cut and populations are convinced that current violence is purely a moral failing. I'm going to say it again. Power structures benefit when historical threads are cut and populations are convinced that current violence is purely a moral failing. Initiatives such as the 1776 Commission, right, battles over history textbooks, and museum censorship reflect efforts to erase the uncomfortable truths that connect past injustices to current outcomes. Without this context, people are left with myths that demonize rather than explain. All right. So when people don't have the history and they're not connecting the history to present day realities that African Americans are faced with, they tend to demonize the individuals, right? They demonize the racial groups. All right. It's because these Black people are animals, right? It's because they're violent. It's because these people are just, biologically just they're in error, right? It becomes these very sort of, you know, theoretical or mythological, just negative sort of theories that they tend to place on the group. All right. So again, when history is disconnected from Black on Black violence, it's more than likely viewed as a moral failing. All right. They don't take into consideration the 1776 Commission, battles over history textbooks and museum censorship. All right. And the efforts to erase the uncomfortable truths that connect past injustices to current outcomes. Without this context, people are left with myths that demonize rather than explain. When history is erased, the causes of violence are obscured, leaving only blame where understanding and repair are needed. If we were to restore the tapestry, the connections become undeniable. Neighborhoods redlined in the 1930s are still disproportionately impoverished, underfunded, and overpoliced today. School districts serving predominantly Black and Brown students receive billions less in funding, directly impacting opportunities to escape cycles of poverty, right? So a lot of billions were just completely wiped away from, I want to say in Atlanta, because they wouldn't. I want to say I don't know if it was an Atlanta school district where they didn't remove the DEI policies, right? That will allow minorities opportunities, just like everybody else. And what did the president do? He cut, millions, you know, from, at this point you're losing funding if you tend to, align with the DEI initiative, right? With diversity. So you can see what happened historically in present day. You know, so again, school districts serving predominantly Black and Brown students receive billions less in funding, directly impacting opportunities to escape cycles of poverty. Deindustrialization hollowed out urban economies, stripping away stable jobs and replacing them with precarious work or no work at all, while the justice system systemically underprotects Black victims. All right, these legacies accumulate, turning trauma into cycles of mistrust, desperation, and misdirected anger. Violence becomes not the cause, but the symptom of communities surviving in conditions imposed upon them. All right. So it says here culture plays a unique role in this cycle. Hip hop was born in the Bronx, not as a soundtrack of destruction, but as a peace project, a way for marginalized youth to turn pain into expression and rivalry into art. Early movements like Zulu Nation and the Stop the Violence campaign sought to unify communities against systemic oppression and violence. Yet, as the industry evolved, commercial incentives shifted toward glorifying conflict and spectacle. All right. Turning an art form once rooted in healing into a vehicle that often reinforces the very stereotypes it once resisted. All right. The challenge today is not to abandon culture, but to reclaim its original role as a unifier rather than divider. All right. It's also vital to remember that this is not uniquely a Black problem, but a human one. All right. Any community deprived of equity, stripped of opportunity, and denied the chance to grow its talents will face elevated risk of crime and self destruction. When groups are starved of fair access to resources, the resulting frustration and desperation often spill inward. This pattern has become observed globally. All right. Indigenous populations marginalized in their lands, immigrant groups excluded from labor markets, and even white ethnic groups in earlier eras when they were relegated to urban slums all saw crime rise under deprivation. Violence emerges wherever injustice festers. All right. It is a human response to denied humanity. So this isn't just a Black issue. History itself bears this out in Europe long before the birth of America. Generations lived under famine, plague, and rigid hierarchies where land was hoarded by elites, leaving masses with little opportunity for farming, food, or advancement. Poverty, disease, and resource scarcity fueled wars, all right? Riots and communal bloodshed between Europeans themselves, setting the stage for colonial ventures and the eventual founding of the United States. America was founded out of white on white crime, white on white violence. That's that birth America. All right. It was one of the pillars to, we need to get out and explore new territory because it's just impossible to really thrive and live in this environment. All right. So even Europeans themselves, out of in response to white on white violence, came to the Americas. All right. So again, poverty, disease, and resource scarcity fueled wars, riots, and communal bloodshed between Europeans themselves, setting the stage for colonial ventures and the eventual founding of the United States. This violence, too, was born from deprivation and inequality, not from cultural essence, right? So you don't see white people calling themselves monsters and, oh, these white people are animals, they warring with each other, killing each other off, right? It was all right, right? It was okay, right? We celebrated, right? Oh, we had Christopher Columbus and all this, right? We don't look at it like, damn, these motherfuckers was killing each other and wiping each other out, right? So what's different for Black folks, right? That just kind of shows you the bias towards the African American, in this world where it's okay for everybody else. It's okay for the white people to kind of war with each other. They go out to the Americas to escape it because they're killing each other off, and there's war and poverty and famine. And we've created America. They turned their white on white violence into like positive historical talking points. Oh, we were so great. Oh, we built this beautiful country, right? But they look at it in the Black community like, oh, you Black people, but you guys are doing the same thing, right? So here it says, poverty, disease, and resource scarcity fueled wars, riots, and communal bloodshed between Europeans themselves, setting the stage for colonial ventures and the eventual founding of the United States. This violence, too, was born from deprivation and inequality, not from cultural essence. All right. To see Black on Black violence as unique is to miss the larger truth. Human beings across history, when they're starved of equity, turn against one another until systems of justice and opportunity are built. All right. Hey, what's up, Highwayman? Good to see you, man. So we're going to talk about 15 points on Black violence. All right. Number one, crime follows proximity, not race. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics data, most violent crimes across all racial groups is interracial. People commit crimes against those that live near in highly segregated environments. This means Black victims and perpetrators are often from the same neighborhoods. Just as white on white crime is the majority among whites, yet the phrase Black on Black crime is weaponized to isolate African Americans as uniquely violent, erasing the structural conditions that create the proximity. All right. So, what we can do is reframe the narrative by always connecting violent statistics to segregation and proximity, not biology. All right. Redlining built long term vulnerability. Government backed redlining maps in the 1930s labeled Black neighborhoods as hazardous, cutting them off from mortgages and investments. Those same areas today face high poverty rates, low property values, and disproportionate violent victimization. All right. This history shows that concentrated violence has roots in concentrated disinvestment, not in cultural flaws. All right. What we can do, prioritize reinvestment in historically redlined communities through housing programs, infrastructure repair, and targeted economic development. Yeah. Blessed ain't believers on it. So Deindustrialization removed economic anchors. Factories once provided stable wages for Black families in cities like Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia. But when jobs were shipped overseas and automation took over, entire neighborhoods collapsed under joblessness. This stripped men of stable provider roles, destabilized families, and left youth with limited pathways beyond underground economies. All right. School districts serving predominantly Black students receive billions less in funding each year than white districts. This leads to overcrowded classrooms, fewer counselors, outdated materials, and limited extracurricular opportunities. With schools unable to nurture talents, frustration and hopelessness starts to arise, feeding delinquency and dropouts. All right. Black Americans are disproportionately impacted by firearm homicides, not because of culture, but because guns are abundant in under resourced neighborhoods where disputes escalates without trusted institutions to resolve them. Easy access plus concentrated poverty makes lethal violence more common. Right. When murders of Black victims are less likely to be solved, communities lose faith in the justice system. This distrust leads to fewer witnesses, less cooperation, and cycles of retaliation that deepen the violence. The state's failure to deliver equal justice reinforces the feeling that Black lives are expendable. All right. Harsh sentencing policies and racial disparities in arrest remove millions of Black men from their homes and communities. This mass removal fractured families, left children without fathers, and destabilized entire neighborhoods without reducing crime proportionally. All right. So when you removed a lot of the Black men from the homes, right, with this whole thing on the war on drugs, and then you got welfare and food stamps where a lot of women couldn't even qualify if they had a man in the home, and it's all these different things, man. It just was the perfect storm, like a perfect cocktail for just violence and destruction, right? Like again, it's no different than the Europeans, right? When they're warring with each other because of poverty, because of plague, because of disease, because of famine, the elites are kind of taking over a lot of the land. What do, right? They're warring with each other. They're killing each other. You got the Europeans against the Irish. You got the Germans against, the Jewish population. You have so many different wars happening in their own communities as well, right? But you don't hear a lot of people talking about that, right? You don't hear a lot about the stereotyping of white people like, hey, you guys are violent in your own communities against each other when the conditions change, right? So, um, programs like COINTELPRO deliberately undermine Black leadership, planting seeds of distrust among activists and organizations. This weakened the community's ability to organize collectively, our collective our safety measures, and fueled fragmentation. When trust erodes, violence mediation becomes harder to achieve, right? So you had Martin Luther King, right? You had Malcolm X, you had different civil rights groups and the Black Panther Party, people who tried to make a positive impact on the Black community and teach them leadership, from a more mature biblical, and if they weren't biblical or spiritual perspective, right? But then you have the government infiltrating some of these groups, right? They're turning members against each other. Now I can't trust you. You're already in a condition of poverty and, lack and oppression, and you're already paranoid as hell, right? Because everywhere you go, you're basically a target. Now you got to worry about people in your group, betraying you. So it's just, you know, I truly believe the American government hates African Americans. They really hate Black folks, so I can't be mad at a lot of these Black people. I don't agree with the Black on Black violence, but I can't be mad at them for being upset. You just can't, because it's just when you got a whole fucking country against you, like it's different when it's already enough having one nigga against you in Detroit, and then you got to watch out, protect your whole family, the whole fucking country. It's like, what the fuck. So white people be looking at me like a motherfucking statue, man, when I be walking around. Because in their mind, they're like, I know these Black people are mad as a motherfucker. What are they going to do? Is Randy going to be violent? Is Randy going to attack me? White people are on super high alert right now. They can't wait to just stare at a nigga to see how is he going to respond. What is he going to do? I feel it. I can read you motherfuckers' mind, right? We're not that different from each other as human beings, all right? Ain't nobody going to hurt you motherfuckers, right? I destroy my enemies with knowledge, all right? So the knowledge is the power. All right. If I put my fucking hands on you and go rage and all this shit, then you're in jail. I can't see my kids. You see my kids on YouTube. I love my kids. They're more important than you motherfuckers. But I get back with the knowledge and educating myself and spreading this wisdom from extracting these lessons, from these really, really sad conditions that Black people are in. So By erasing or sanitizing history, whether through school curriculum, censored museums, or political commissions, powerful groups disconnect the causes of present violence from their roots. All right. Donald Trump is like, man, if I can remove all this shit about slavery and all the bad shit that we did from these museums, this will further facilitate this narrative that it's these black folks that are the problem. It's something wrong with them. It's just innately in them, right? It just kind of furthers these other narratives. It's deeper than just, oh, we don't want this shit in the museum. It's to kind of keep strengthening, because you already have these white, hate groups against African Americans that are already writing this narrative that black people are animals, they're criminals, they're so bad. So they just want to keep strengthening this narrative. So that way, if they can have this class warfare and civil war, it just gives more power to the government to come run, just to lock the whole damn country down, right? The more they keep us divided, the more it strengthens the government's ability to just kind of enforce law. So, um, sanitizing and erasing history, right? So it says by erasing or sanitizing history, whether through school curricula, censored museums, or political commissions, powerful groups disconnect the causes of present violence from their roots. This allows stereotypes to flourish, framing Black communities as violent without context. All right. The roots of hip hop lie in unity. Bronx block parties, Zulu Nation's Peace Creed, and cross borough initiatives like the Stop the Violence campaign. These efforts turned anger into art and created nonviolent outlets for expression. Over time, however, market incentives shifted towards glamorizing conflict, all right? And this isn't just on the market, right? You had niggas that was just violent as hell, all right? And they just wanted to kind of come in and talk all kind of nastiness towards their brother. All right. So there's also a combination of market incentives, but you also just had, as the generations got younger and younger, and the Black people got more disconnected from each other with that anger, it's just, you just had a bunch of ignorant ass niggas, and just, that everybody ultimately has a choice, right? I grew up in Detroit. I grew up in, shit environments, and made the best of what I could, thank God for my grandmother, but I didn't choose to go out. And, I'm not going to say I wasn't listening to, hip hop music that was, um, sort of like justice driven, and, they're out there talking their shit, but I didn't go out there and, try to promote violence against, brothers and things like that. And I grew up in fucking murder capital, but again, it's a systemic issue, but it's also, on the individual to make better, healthier choices, in our communities. What is the root of this issue? Yale University just recently, the Biden administration has done a study upon a certain group of people in America, the Caribbeans. What did they find out about them? Oh, that's a good point. I have to do some research on that to see. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, Thank you for bringing it up. I think the root of the issue is that a lot of the dominant white elites want to deflect from themselves as much as possible. If the dominant white elites in this country that are really the movers and shakers could be invisible, you better believe those motherfuckers would be invisible, because they don't want you putting too much attention on them, because you diffuse their power. You sort of like diffuse the hierarchy because you see their humanity. They don't want that will ruin their sort of like status on the totem pole if you see that they're just as capable of violence in their intra communities as the Black people are. So they want to deflect as much as they can. No, don't look at us. That's why every time you try to talk to people about racism in America and Black experiences, what they do, they'll deflect. They kind of adopted some of the same talking points as mainstream society. No, but what about these other communities? Well, every time you try to get motherfuckers just to focus on Black people and Black struggle, they, oh, well, what about this? And what about that? And when you try to talk about the white people and the white racism, oh, well, Black people are racist too. Well, it's just we're in a deflecting ass society. And that's what is a sort of like a product of the system. They want to deflect as much as they can from the cause of what's going on, currently. Now, there's many different causes. It's not just the dominant white elites that cause the violence in the Black community. There was always some degree of violence among African tribes that were occurring, depending on differences and different things like that. But in terms of it being, systematized like it is in terms of the court system, the police system, and the media, this is like taking the shit to another level. All right. Back in Africa, the shit was just kind of between the tribes, right? You ain't have the motherfucker putting the movies. Motherfuckers wasn't going to creating governments and shit based off of it. All right. So it became like a almost like a capitalist, you know, system built off of just this enmity, towards African Americans. It became this big systemic thing. That's why you have such a short percentage of African Americans in the police force, in Congress, in the FBI, in the CIA, because a lot of white people are like, we're not hiring these niggas. They're violent. We don't like them. Let's just bring more of our people in. I like you guys. I don't like them. So that's what was the birth of the creation of the system that we're in. So I have to go. I have to work. Um, Appreciate you guys. I'm gonna come back on a little bit later this afternoon and finish this. I'm not even really finished. Time is going by fast as a motherfucker. So it's like you don't really have enough time in the damn day, these days to even do a video. Shit, don't be a full-time worker, man. You'd be lucky if you can even breathe. So I hope you guys have a blessed day. I'm gonna come back on later and finish talking about this topic of black on black violence. And one video is not enough. This is more so just an introduction and how disconnecting the history makes the black person morally, inept, right? Because we're not looking at the history and the conditions and all of that stuff. Like we look at the white conditions and the history and what they had to go through, right? But I noticed like white on white violence with these different wars is like glamorized, right? It's like, oh my God, they're fighting for their freedom. Oh man, they're so patriotic. But then when it's like you got, black on black violence, is like, oh, these niggas are so ignorant. So yeah, we're gonna break this shit down, man. I'm just really getting started. I appreciate you guys um tapping in. And I hope you have a good day, man. I'm gonna go ahead and get back into work. Peace.